A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
This is a continuation of our News and Bits episode from a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't get to all the topics that we wanted to talk about it, but we'll finish up now. So here's the one I want to talk about, and that's cancel culture. In early September, John Gibson, who is now the former CEO of Tripwire Interactive, which is a video game company developer, he tweeted an opinion about a newly enacted and very unpopular Texas law. He made a public comment about a controversial political issue. It, of course, blows up on the internet, as that's what the internet is for, right? Things can blow up. Some people on his team quit. Some of their business partners make statements saying that they would no longer be working with Tripwire. After a few days, he steps down from his CEO position, and Tripwire distances their company from his private opinions. He and his defenders are claiming that he has been the victim of cancel culture. It should be noted that both Gibson and Tripwire are fine. Neither one will go bankrupt without the other. They're doing just fine. So what are the ethics of this? How is it okay for people to take their business elsewhere for political reasons?
There's also this other case, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about them together.
Yeah, all right. So let me describe the other one too. So within a day or two of Tripwire's problems, there was a Kickstarter campaign that started for a fishing-themed card game. One of the images showed is a realistically rendered frog with the frog's right hand clearly visible with his thumb and forefinger making this sort of P symbol, which, for anybody who doesn't know, there's a cartoon frog named Pepe who has been picked up and used by white supremacists as sort of a symbol of white supremacy. And also, white supremacists use hand gestures representing the W and P of white power. So between the two things, this frog, realistically rendered frog, doesn't look like Pepe, but it's a frog and it's doing half of this white power thing. People called out this apparent symbolism for to the creators of the fishing game, and the creators pushed back very strongly, saying that they didn't intend to make it something that reminded anyone of white supremacy, and they ridiculed the people who thought so. This blows up on the internet also. Some of the game's publishing partners vowed to stop working with them. The creator of the Kickstarter felt that they were the victims of cancel culture. One of them says he is so disgusted that he may quit the industry altogether. So it should be noted here also that the Kickstarter is doing fine. They're not going to not publish the game. In some ways, you could argue that the publicity probably got them more views.
In fact, I think that's exactly what happened. I think essentially they got this criticism. They said, we're being canceled, and lots of people in reaction to that essentially gave the money. So
right. Whether or not they gave them money because they were being canceled or because they just happened to now see the Kickstarter and go, oh, that looks like a good game. I will back this game. And I believe that the creators did not intend it to be a white power. They didn't intend the symbolism, but the reaction to it was so strong and so like negative. Mm-hmm. The reaction to it, instead of just saying, oh my gosh, we didn't realize, here, let us change the illustration, which wouldn't have taken very much to do, right?
And it seems that, if you look at the image, right, for, for their frog, I mean, it's not just that his fingers look like they're doing a P, but, I mean, the image that they use for the rule book, like, literally looks like the hand signs for both a W and a P. At least, I mean, mind you, okay, it's a frog, and it has 3 fingers, so a W is really easy to do.
Super easy, right. I don't think they intended it, so I don't believe that they are being canceled. I believe that people raised a concern, and then they had this very, very negative reaction, and that's what blew up on the internet.
That they treated the concern as so ridiculous.
Yeah, that's right. They didn't take the concern seriously.
So we have these two cases, and here's one of the reasons that I want to kind of say that there's at least something that we need to consider that's different about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the idea is, in this case, with the frog, right? We have the situation where the issue itself is the issue of white power, right?
Yeah,
And
white supremacy.
white supremacy, right? An issue that is let's say accepted as beyond the pale, right?
Sure.
Whatever that means, and we could talk about that.
I honestly don't know that matters.
I think we could talk about whether that matters, right?
Okay.
Versus, let's say, in the first one with Tripwire, right? Versus a controversy about the support for a controversial law, which is the abortion law, right?
Right.
Where people have obviously defensible opinions about, right, abortion.
Right. People have very strong opinions about both of these things.
Right. But at least to start off with, I think that it's generally considered okay. And when I say generally considered okay, I'm going to walk that back a little bit later because, fuck whatever is generally considered okay. Right.
Right. Sure.
That's just whatever the public thinks at the moment. I want to know if it really is okay. But generally considered, right, reasonable people can disagree on abortion, even though they might have strong opinions about it. We're not really at the point where we have, reasonable people disagreeing about, white supremacy, right? And
yeah, but I mean, what's reasonable? And I'm not going to go and defend white supremacy, but I will say that it is foundational to a lot of Western culture, and and any challenge to that is going to be pushed back by a lot of very reasonable people.
I guess first of all, I think it's what you mean by what ends up being meant by white supremacy. But I think I think there are kind of ways to divide issues like this to some degree. For example, if your position is based on things that are empirically false, like let's say ideas about genetic supremacy of one race, right, or the basic abilities of one race, or we can go back to phrenology in the 19th century, the phrenology of black people's skulls and how that shows that they're less intelligent. So notice, right? If your ideas are just based on just straight up falsehoods, right? To me, you're not. You should be treated very differently than if your ideas are based on, let's say, value priorities, which you might have in abortion, or very controversial, unclear starting points, as you might have in abortion. And the act of canceling, and we should talk about what canceling is, I think
I'll get to that.
would be different for one or the other. But let's get to that, and then let's come back to this.
Yeah, because I think we need to talk about like what is being accused,
okay,
and who is doing the accusing.
Fair enough.
When we talk about cancel culture, so I think everybody would agree that if you don't want to buy a product from a certain person for whatever reason, you don't have to. If you don't want to do business with the guy across the street because he's an asshole, you don't have to do business with the guy across the street.
Right.
You can make whatever business decision you want in regards to that.
Right.
So, people deciding. So part of what cancel culture is this idea that that we shouldn't be allowed to make business decisions based on someone's politics, or politics should be separate from our business decisions. That we shouldn't bring politics into our business decisions or into our gaming environments. But of course, it's impossible, right? Everything is political in some way or another. You're supporting causes in almost everything that we do.
The question might be why you don't want to do business with them. Now,
what I'm saying is that it doesn't matter.
Right.
If you don't want to, you shouldn't have to, and it shouldn't matter why that is. You could not do business with him because he's got red hair and you don't like red hair. You don't have to do business with him.
can I refuse to do business with him because he's black or Jewish?
Well, in
Right.
some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. Right? There's been there of course, these groups of people that are have been protected, but you can, in fact, make that decision.
Sure. I mean, so there's right. We have legal rights and moral rights,
Right.
right? And we have the way we can practically behave, right?
Right.
So let's say legally, the question would be: are you interacting with this person as some sort of protected category, right?
Right.
If you decide, let's say, that you as a customer don't want to, buy a game because the creator of the game has a different political view than you do, or has a different race than you do,
Hmm.
right? I don't think any law is there to stop you. But
Right. So let's take the bakery example, right? Because we're going to get there. We might as well just go there now.
okay,
There was the bakery several years back made a bunch of news because they did not want to sell a wedding cake to a gay couple.
Right.
The business has an obligation as part of as part of its license to, when it opens its doors to the public, it opens its doors to all of the public. So they are then obliged to sell a cake to whomever comes through the door. Now, there are some restrictions. There are some limits to that, of course. If people are unruly or whatever, they can kick them out. But in terms of like racial, these protected categories, those protected categories are protected in that way. However, if the reverse were true, let's say it's a gay bakery, and you were having a wedding and you didn't want to do business with that gay bakery, you are not obliged to. As a private citizen, you're not obliged to take your business to any specific people because of their protected status.
though it's interesting. Again, notice we could be talking in about legality here. Though to me,
Right.
it's kind of interesting of how
We are talking about legality.
we are talking about legality, but legality is also different in different places, right? And this might be,
Right.
in fact, this might be different even in the United States between California and Oklahoma. You might have different, some specific different laws about stuff like this. So, if you put this in a game context, right? I can't say, I'm not going to sell my game to a group of people based on, let's say, their sex, right?
Right.
Or their race, right? I also can't say that I'm going to hire only a certain group of people, right, based on their race or sex,
Right.
and then you have things like the political viewpoints kind of fall in here. Now, cancel culture is not that, right, because it's not about legal stuff, right? But it is about kind of a related idea, right? Do you have a kind of moral right to say, to essentially say this person is off limits and everybody should essentially treat this person a certain way because of their beliefs, essentially, or because of something that they said?
Yeah, so cancel culture, when somebody invokes the words cancel culture, what they're trying to do is they're trying to invoke this idea of an unruly mob, right? And nobody likes a mob. Nobody likes the pitchforks and torches to come out. Uh, uh, and so I think when people say, this is cancel culture, it's people agitating. It's some small percentage of people agitating for other people to not use their services, not be in business with them, disconnect from them socially, etc.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And we should say that cancel culture has been around for a very, very long time, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's only been recently called cancel culture because I think the terminology is important, right? This cancel culture is a thing by itself. We have been, of course, canceling people for all kinds of reasons for hundreds and thousands of years.
Right. This is from the beginning of human civilization. We have essentially decided that some people are too whatever in their views, right, and need to be shunned.
Right. And so I want to not talk about that general idea and just talk about this specific thing that we are now in the last, say, 10 years calling cancel culture. Maybe it's not even that long. Strangely, what happens with cancel culture is that it's almost always invoked when somebody gets in trouble for presenting an idea that upholds sort of the status quo. Some element of the status quo becomes controversial as things change. So somebody pushes back and makes an argument, makes a statement that sounds like it's too conservative. The people who are challenging this status quo jump in, and then the original poster's defenders come in and say, whoa, cancel culture. This is cancel culture. Cancel culture is bad. We shouldn't do a cancel. We should be careful. We should be careful about how we use cancel culture. It is almost never used in the opposite way. So cancel culture seems to be a defense of traditional values against challenges to traditional values invoked.
Right. So we're not talking about, let's say, the Dixie Chicks, getting, when they protested Bush in the Iraq War in the mid-2000s, getting absolutely, their career destroyed at that point by conservatives.
So in some ways we are, right? Because it's literally exactly the same thing. It just wasn't called cancel culture.
Okay, well that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, right. Sure. So and absolutely nobody had nobody defended them with this defense. Nobody invoked cancel culture as a defense of the Dixie Chicks.
Right, that they were just being canceled because of their political opinions, and people, should be allowed to have their own political opinions. Instead, that was going against the prevailing conservative opinion, and they were talking to a conservative audience.
Right, and so and everybody just accepted that there are repercussions for public people to speak out. And if you're a public person and you speak out on a controversial topic, then you're going to face consequences for that from the public.
Sure. Is John Gibson a public person?
Well, so there's an interesting question, right? He's the CEO of this company. Does that make him public enough?
To me, it really makes a difference. It really makes a difference about what it means to be a CEO of a company and what kind of company we're talking about, right? If Elon Musk, right? So Elon Musk, let's say, right, he has a publicly traded company.
Yeah.
Right. But he's this oversized personality where it's his company. Stockholders are invested in this company, knowing that his personality drives this company, drives its publicity. What he does in his private life definitely impacts the sort of things that, the outcome for investors, right? Is John Gibson in a situation like this? Is this company kind of big like this? Is he entitled to have have a private opinion and express that private opinion, or is all of his to me?
Well, if once he expresses it, is it a private opinion anymore, or is it a public opinion?
To me, like everything Elon Musk says is no longer a private opinion. Because he just made himself so, he kind of made himself so public.
Right. I sort of believe that I'm sure Elon Musk has a private life. But his public persona is so big and so it just eclipses whatever private life he has.
Yeah, maybe. And to me, it seems to me like he's kind of made that choice in some way. But it's a hard
Absolutely.
choice. It's a really hard choice to make these days. I mean, I'm thinking more of like, do teachers, have a private life when they post something on their personal Facebook page,
right?
Right, and that's something, let's say, ends up being, racist. Was that just a privately expressed opinion or not? Right.
Right. And Facebook has public and private options for your posts, so that you can control that.
Oh, you can, but that doesn't matter, right? Because teachers have lost their jobs because they've said something that was private on Facebook to their friends, but it got out. And and the idea
is, again, you have control. You have some control over that.
Some control, but it's very limited, right? So let's say if this guy, John Gibson, essentially, it's not just. I think it doesn't just matter what he expresses as CEO, but also how he expresses it.
Hmm.
Um, is he expressing it in the capacity of CEO? Is he
Right.
expressing it as as CEO
If
on
he,
behalf of
if he's
Tripwire
expressing it
Games? Mm,
as a so when you're talking about a private opinion, you're talking about I'm expressing this as a private citizen, not in my role as my public role as CEO or as uh,
right,
Olympic gymnast or as a presidential candidate or whatever it
right.
happens to be.
Right. So let's say he expresses this, and I think it's also the way he expressed what he said. I think also kind of matters. Here's what he wrote. He said, "As an entertainer, I don't get political often. Yet with so many vocal peers on the other side of the issue, I felt like it was important to go on record as a pro-life game developer." Right.
Right.
So, I read him, he's acknowledging the politics of what he's saying. He's aware of what he's saying.
Oh, sure.
He said, putting himself, he's a balancing influence. Part of his, what he's saying here is a public statement from himself, right? It's not meant to be private, right?
Right.
And especially, um, he's putting it in a fair context. He's not being disrespectful to anyone. He didn't just kind of praise the issue, and he essentially, um, to me, being very respectful about what what he's doing. I mean, it's hard for
Yeah,
me
I
to
mean,
see him doing anything wrong.
all he's
Yeah.
doing is expressing a political opinion, right? Yeah, and I don't see him doing anything wrong, in the
Right.
sense of that. I mean, I think that there are, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds of the underlying issue, but expressing your opinion about a political statement shouldn't be considered wrong, but it might have consequences.
Um,
There's a lot of things that we do that are not right or wrong and just have consequences.
sure, but there are questions about whether the consequences are fair or not,
Hmm.
right? So if you're going to look at the, impact of what happens, right? Whether we call
Right.
it cancel culture or not, right?
Right.
Uh, let's say, is that negative impact fair? Well, maybe it's fair if he did something wrong, right? And it's unfair if he didn't do anything wrong, right? So for me, you can't disjoin those two things, right?
Okay.
That the fairness of the reaction has to relate to whether he actually did something wrong. Now that said, you could also um, take something that someone did wrong and react to it in a way that goes far beyond what is smart or compassionate to do in terms of punishment.
Right.
Even if he did something wrong, let's say, there's a question of why he did it, in what context he did it, what he really meant by it, right? So
Right.
when I think about the, is it TGG with the frog game?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So TGG with their frog game, right? If like if they intentionally made that frog, okay,
Right.
intentionally putting like a white power symbol into your game, um, I think it's pretty fair you get like a reaction. Accidentally doing it,
Right.
you shouldn't be blamed in the same way, right?
Right. But right, and they weren't
Right,
initially. Right.
right, and
They literally the people who commented on it were commenting on it because they assumed, rightfully, that these people didn't know exactly what they were doing, that they hadn't realized what they had done.
right. Now, next comes the third question to me, which is, were they negligent? Should they have realized this? Should they have known this? And I don't
Um,
really know. My guess is probably not.
when you tell somebody that they are in that they have caused harm or that they are about to cause harm, right? Um, that by itself is, how they react to that is the measure of them as people, right?
Right. So, yeah, and I think that's kind of the, to me, I don't know if I fit this under negligence or not. But the negligence part would have to do like, were you not aware that this could cause harm, right? And maybe
Right.
not, right? And
And maybe not. And
right?
I believe that they probably were not aware of it until people told them.
Right, and I would think so. But now you're at
And it should also
Mm.
be noted that they did take that image off of their Kickstarter. I don't know if it'll actually appear on the cover of their rule book. That we won't know until that gets published.
That would be interesting considering how much fun they made of the people that did it, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. Right now, if you're told that, look, inadvertently you created something that is a symbol of hate for people, and to me, like something that might draw like white supremacists to your game,
Right.
right? Which itself is kind of interesting. Right? And let's say could potentially encourage people to essentially cause harm to others. If you were told this and you essentially kind of laugh it off, at that point, right? It seems to
Or
me
get angry, or how they reacted was in anger.
in
like,
anger, right?
Right. Like, what? Are you kidding me? This is not. How dare you?
Right. So at that point, right? It seems to me that you're essentially acting poorly in a way that opens you up to judgment from others based on how you reacted, not based on your original, like making
That's
the
right.
frog accidentally. Again, 3 fingers and a W. I mean,
Right.
really, really easy to do if you're a frog, right? But to think, hey, look, it doesn't really matter. That, to me, that kind of callousness. And I think you can say, like, look, I get what you're saying. I don't think the frog is close enough to this situation. We as a team have thought about it. We really like our image of the frog. We are making it very clear we're not supporting any white supremacism, and we don't believe this will cause harm to anybody. So we decided to go with our original creative decision and keep it. That's a respectable reply, I think, too.
That's right.
But it's a respectable reply only if you think it really is true that
Right,
this
right.
won't lead to white supremacy. It's interesting. I was thinking of what if you made a uniform design in a game where it just so happens that every time the character turns to the side, the uniform shows a swastika on the side of their body, right?
Mhm.
You didn't intend that, right? It just kind of happened that way. And if you're like, yeah, I don't know, it's, we didn't mean that, but we don't think that's not gonna do any harm. We like our design. We're just keeping it. We're gonna go with our original creative, creative license. Well, I think you're wrong. And I think you're in this case you're being reckless, right? You're not really being reckless, but you really should know better.
It's kind of reckless. I mean, somebody, if it promotes an idea that ends up that ends up causing strife and turmoil and pain for somebody, then that's reckless.
Reckless is if you know that this is likely or has a good likelihood of actually causing harm, and you do it anyway.
Okay.
Right? So they might be rejecting the
But if
very
it has
idea.
a small likelihood, and you do it anyway, that's not reckless.
Right. So notice, right? This is obviously a point where you're like, where do you draw the line?
Right.
Right. How much does it need to be? Right. If they're
Right. saying,
saying, nah, it's just a swastika, that doesn't mean anything. I would say they're missing some facts. Now,
Right.
this is where I want to go to something like the abortion situation,
Yeah.
and say that you don't have a lot of the kind of same things there.
Right. So let me go. Yeah. So I wanted to get back to the abortion thing, and I guess since we're talking about it, let's go all in. Both sides believe that the other is promoting ideas that actively hurt, and hurt in a majorly strong way other people.
Right.
The reasonable take on this is that the people who feel strongly about it for reasons, and the reasons are good reasons.
Right.
Right. They feel strongly about it because they believe that a zygote is a human being, and that therefore abortion is equivalent to killing a baby.
Sure.
and we can all agree that killing babies is wrong.
Right.
Uh,
So good motivating reason here.
Good motivating reasons, and a good reason to say, hey, the wrong that you're causing by promoting this idea is strong enough and warrants a strong reaction. And then the reverse is true as well. Like women not free to have control of their own bodies is an attack on some basic liberties, right?
Right.
And that's a very strong reason. We can all agree that we should have control over our own bodies.
Yeah, so where are we in here, right? Is this essentially the same kind of situation where in both cases the people believe that they're preventing harm from happening, and the other people
Right.
are thinking that they're preventing harm from happening, or
Right.
that the people are recklessly enabling harm to happen.
And that's why I think that, like, earlier on you were trying to draw a distinction, some sort of like a starkness distinction between white supremacy and this other, where like white supremacy is beyond the pale, you might say, whereas the abortion thing is just a political decision. Well, it's not to the people who it's just as stark. It's just as important.
I think it's really important for people to recognize that there's a difference between talking about situations that are morally complex, where reasonable people can have, very different views, even if those views are based on very big consequences, on things of very, very big import, and that there's and that the underlying reasons for those views are respectable, right? And we have a bunch of those, right? I think the death penalty is another one of those.
Yeah.
I think immigration is another one of those.
Yeah, sure.
I think there's plenty of those. And if I teach a class in contemporary moral issues, and practically
Right.
every one of those is in there, right? But I don't in that class, I don't have a section on is white supremacy okay? Right.
Right.
And part of that is that and this is not just a cultural debate where the cultural conventions at this point just kind of say that this is beyond the pale, right? It's because there's really not much to say that is factual and defensible about this issue, right? The same would be like, so when the gay marriage debate was going on in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to teach it in my class, but there were so few reasonable arguments against gay marriage, right?
Right.
One was, for example, that it would be very harmful to children. That I think that was the most reasonable. And when I say reasonable, I mean it's like a real question. This could cause potential harm. Then you have real answers. Will it cause? And we have answers at this point to this question. It's no longer
right. I was saying, yeah. Let's make sure that that's not
right.
People don't misunderstand us and think that that's actually a question now.
Right, but back then, when people were asking this, okay, I'm like, okay, I can see how
it was still not a reasonable question. It was only a reasonable question if you had if you had been acculturated to believe that there was something wrong and something degrading about homosexual relationships.
Okay, then we can disagree on this. I think as long as you're talking about the possible harm for a group of people and that matter, and you don't have data for it, I think I think it becomes a reasonable question. My point is, that was pretty much it. And at the time, all they could do on the gay marriage part was essentially say, we don't know yet, so we need more time. And again, is that enough of a reason to invalidate people's civil rights? I certainly don't think so.
Right. Right.
But besides that, I couldn't find any other arguments that were remotely right, other than simple prejudice. Right.
Right.
And if you have a situation like this, it's very hard for me to see, both sides of the fence here being, defensible, right?
Right.
And I think the white power thing very much is in that kind of same place. There's you know, any opinions are either based on bad facts. There's no real arguments, right?
Right.
That are power. So notice it's not just social convention, right?
Yeah.
And to me, this makes a really big difference if you're being canceled on one versus the other. Having said that, what counts as like you're supporting white power is far from clear.
Right.
Right. And this is, I think, where cancel culture hits this big other thing, because, you know, like I think like John Gibson's statements are completely okay. Right. I don't think there's a thing wrong with them. Supporting supporting abortion, I think, is, you know, even though I'm a pro-choice person, I think, you know, pro-life position is very defensible. But you know, promoting white supremacy, I think is not. And, you know, the question that becomes, are you saying that TGG Games are promoting white supremacy? Are you accusing them of something like this? And this is where you get all the calls for sexism and racism that may or may not be sexism, racism, and people get canceled on things that are also not clearly wrong. So to me, there has to be this connection between the wrongness and the response.
Right. So if it does, even though they don't intend it to, you know, we're going back to that, right? If there's one person in the audience out of 1 million people that see this image that go, thank God there's somebody like me who believes that white people are better than everybody else.
Sure.
I mean, of course.
But, you know, is it worse than other things, right? I mean, what are the kind of options involved? Right?
Is it worse than changing the position of the frog's hands?
Right. And
that's the question, right?
Right. And, you know,
is it worse than doing a little bit of extra work to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Though notice, right, one of the things we can ask is how much extra work, right?
Well, right.
But
in this case, we absolutely know how much extra work.
Right.
It's not very much.
It's not very much, right? So if we're talking about one image, right,
and a small portion of one image,
right, a small portion
right.
of what image, right?
Right.
And how much does that image really mean to the creator, right?
Right.
Might kind of go
specifically
into it, right?
How important is it to the creator that the frog's hands are placed in this exact placement?
Right.
You know, in their case, they were actually working from a photograph, and the frog's hands happened to be in that position in the photograph.
Right.
So, you know, presumably it was a meaningless decision from the artist, from the artistic point of view.
Okay. Right. You're just copying. Here's the way the frog happens to be. Right.
Right.
Though, you know, it is interesting, right? Part of it is also taking a stance against
against cancel culture
in general, and right,
which we have determined and you've agreed to is always only used to defend traditional status quo values. I mean, doesn't that matter? Don't you think that matters?
That the term only applies to one side? I think it matters in the sense that it draws all the attention to the canceling that's happening in one direction rather than the other. You know, I think it's unhelpful in that way. Again, right, there's like a million things where like conservatives say, let's cancel Facebook. You know, they don't use the word cancel, but screw them.
Right.
Facebook banned Trump. We should all leave Facebook, right?
Right.
I mean, that's canceling Facebook, right?
Right. But what they do instead is they say, Facebook is canceling Donald Trump. We should leave it. Right.
Sure.
I mean, they use cancel culture as the defense of their own actions. So yeah.
Whichever way you call it, right? To me that part, I think it's important to recognize. I think it's just important to recognize that whatever this phenomena is, that it's happening in both directions, you know, and that. And I think that using the term cancel culture to only refer to canceling conservative things kind of misses the point. So that part I think matters, that we want to make sure that we don't kind of miss the point that people are engaged in this in all sides and have been for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. People make decisions about how they spend their dollars for all kinds of different reasons, and some of them are ethical and some of them are unethical.
But at the same time, I think that there also is a point to pointing out that this can get out of hand, and often recently has gotten out of hand, and where you're going to say the response is not fair. The response is not right, right? So John Gibson losing his job, to me, right, that seems like a really unfair response, despite the fact that he's a CEO.
So why not? Why is that unfair? Other people in the company have chosen to lose their jobs because they don't want to work for him anymore.
Well,
Right?
I think that is their prerogative, but the company letting him go
But
because
Tripwire is a business, right?
right,
And if he's harming their business by harming their ability to keep employees, harming their ability to 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 form partnerships with other companies,
right, yeah,
does their business ethics and their business, the business responsibilities and their ethical ethics of being responsible to their business and their employees and to
hmm
their does that trump his private ethics?
I don't know. Yeah, yeah. So we're back to this, and we're back to the and to to me, it's not. I wouldn't call it as trumping his private ethics, but ultimately, I think this is really hard. And I think about teachers who have been fired for saying
Hmm.
things privately, and how many other people have been fired for saying things privately,
Right.
because they say, well, this will reflect back on the
And again,
business.
when you say privately, you mean as a citizen and not as a teacher, not
Right,
necessarily in the privacy of their own homes. There's
right, right.
different ways of using the word privately, and I just want to make sure there's a distinction. If I post things on Facebook, I might be saying them as a private citizen, but I'm not saying them privately.
Though it's interesting, right? I mean, these days you could be saying them, privately in the context where you think you are, let's say, alone with the person you're talking to, but someone
Hmm.
might be, taping that, right? Might getting that on video, and
Right,
then your
right, right,
private statements become public. So part of it, I think, really does matter what your intended form is.
right. And we
You,
see we see things that are caught on live microphones, politicians
right.
speaking candidly, not realizing their microphone is on.
Right, right, and that's an accidental, private turned public,
Right.
and then you've got and this is where I think the teachers are particularly interesting, right? But really, you know, uh, anybody, but the teachers is a question of, you know, does this reveal something about who you are that intrinsically makes it harder to do your job, right?
Right.
So if, let's say, your private conversations reveal that you are like fundamentally racist, right? Then we're talking about putting someone who's fundamentally racist and in front of a classroom of the diverse kids,
Right.
right? That seems to be directly impacting your job, right? But what if you are essentially, right, impacting the reputation of the school, right? Or in this case, the reputation of the business,
Right.
right? And to me, it's, you know, for me, that's tough. It's
Yeah.
really, really tough. I really wish we, gave people more leeway to have a private life where they can say things and not be held to them by the record, and separate their private lives from their professional lives. I think we really need that divide. On the other hand, there are certain things that people do in public that are like, let's say, the people who participated in the January 6th insurrection and then got fired. I mean, that was a very public act of trying to overthrow the government. And that's very different from venting on Facebook to
Sure.
your friends, right?
Right. 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 And
And
it should be, and we should point out that people are not being taken to court for venting on Facebook. They are being taken to court. The people who are being taken to court for January 6th stuff are people who literally took an action,
right,
and they,
though you remember that the cheerleader, right, that wrote on Facebook like "fuck cheerleading," "fuck the high school," "fuck," and she got kicked out of cheerleading.
Right.
Right. Even though she vented it just privately to her friends, right?
Right.
A screenshot of that got out,
Right.
right? So this would be the other kind of thing, right? You know, the school maintained that cheerleaders are supposed to be representatives of the school,
Yeah.
right? And that if you're representing the school in a poor way, then you are not fulfilling your duty as a cheerleader, right?
Right.
But she had a bad day and she was venting on her personal Facebook, right?
Right.
So again, notice this idea of if that gets out, right? It's impacting your position
Right.
as an ambassador, right?
You know, on one hand, then it's impacting yes, everybody can have a bad day, but you don't want to use like, oh, I had a bad day as an excuse for a lot of bad behavior.
Right. Obviously, there's a kind of limit to it, right? And again, right?
Right.
You can use the private racism comment, right?
Right.
With the teacher as as a potential thing. Now, mind you, I haven't thought enough about this to know where to draw the lines here. Obviously,
Right.
If you couldn't tell already,
and honestly, I do think it comes down to to individual tolerances, right? And I would like us to be a diverse country that can talk about a diversity of opinions and can talk about a diversity of people and support and respect a diversity of foundational ethical beliefs.
Sure.
But that's not what we have right now.
Right.
Right? We're working towards it, I think.
Well, and what do you do when what you see as fundamental to that diversity? So let's say if you see abortion as an issue that is absolutely necessary for sex gender equality,
Right.
right? And does this mean that John Gibson, you can't let him get away, as someone might say, right, with that without reaction, because he is getting in the way of, let's say, the kind of diversity of the kind of fundamental state way of being that will allow the kind of diversity you want, right? And that part is, of course, interesting. And of course, there's also positions of diversity undermines unity, right? We should strive instead for unity, and unity means
and I understand that the conundrum and the of my position is I want us to be unified in our acceptance of diversity.
Sure, right.
Right, and so that's where the unity comes in.
Right, and there's nothing self-contradictory about that, but it's just one way to be unified, and it's the harder way to be unified, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to be unified that takes a lot more work and is much harder, I think, to maintain. And ultimately, I think it's one that gets put to the test, because even in that kind of unification, you can only have diversity that goes so far. Right.
There will still be differences of opinions about things and how things are allocated and all of the things that normally are relegated to political opinion.
Sure.
How money is spent.
Sure. I mean, you can have, you can go back to John Locke and a letter concerning religious tolerance of religion, where, he's like, yeah, we should be tolerant of all religions, except the religions that are tolerant of other religions. All right. So, I mean, that's part of the conundrum here, right?
Right.
Because you're always going to have a limit to the toleration you can have. And then you want to make a stand there and say, look, this is where we draw the line. And with things like TGG and the white power, right, for many people, it's like, okay, this is like, okay, maybe I'm willing to accept John Gibson and people like him, but, anything associated where you're like refusing to disassociate yourself from a symbol of white power, that's where we draw the line, and that's where we're not going to be tolerant about it.
Right.
And how does this work for a business? Well, that part I don't know, because remember we had that episode about what the responsibilities of game companies are and what the responsibility of a business is, and only one of the four ways we talked about of thinking about the corporate social responsibility of businesses said that money was the essentially the sole responsibility of businesses, right? And I tend to believe in the social web model. That means that
Right.
businesses are citizens in some sense like everybody else and have responsibilities like everybody else to the community. So for me, it's the fact that it's harder for that if they let go of of John Gibson because it's better for the business. Um, to me, that is purely economic decision, and I tend to fault that. I don't want those things to be purely economic decisions. At the same time, I think those companies have responsibilities to the employees as well. And if it meant
Yeah.
that the company was going to go under and the employees were going to lose their jobs, I would think
Right.
that the responsibility would be stronger to do something about that. But notice that's not just about money, right? That's about responsibilities to your employees too.
That's right. And I tend to believe that I don't believe in single point causality. I don't think that, people make decisions for exactly one causal effect. They make decisions because a variety of things have built up and caused the decision to flip from one side to the other.
Right.
So you look at like, did he lose his job because of the social aspect of what he said, or did he lose his job because of the political the business aspect of what he said, and how the ramifications thereof? And it's probably true that it's probably both are true.
But it seems to be that they're super closely connected here. I mean,
Well, yeah, they are super
right.
closely connected, but they're still separate causes. Like if they hadn't lost the jobs because of him, and they hadn't lost the business partners, would they have still fired him? Maybe, maybe not. If
Right.
if he had tweeted
Well,
something else about a different topic that some people still found objective, but nobody left the business, and nobody and no and they didn't lose any of their business partners, would they have still fired him? Again, we don't know. That's a world that didn't happen.
right.
But both of those two things, at least two things were caused him to lose his job.
Okay.
He
Right.
tweeted something socially
Right.
objectionable, and they lost business. They lost business because of it.
Yeah.
He could have lost his job just because they lost business,
Yeah.
right? He could have not tweeted anything, and people quit because they didn't like him, and people wouldn't do business with them because they didn't like him, and that might still cause them to let him go as CEO, because that's his, like the cheerleader, that's his job.
Um. Yeah. I mean, yeah. As far as why something did happen,
Right.
I don't know how it would help to dig into the causes exactly. But as
Right.
far as like what should happen, and this kind of connects with this idea of, should a business even take a moral stance, on something, right?
Right.
Do
Of
they?
course. I mean, if you believe that we're in a social web, then absolutely they should take a moral stance.
So, if the business said, we're taking a stand against, as many businesses did, we're taking a stand against the Texas law, right?
Right.
And because the CEO is for it, we're going to fire him, right? Yeah, to me, I mean, so right, the social web model, which again I'm for, I still I I think that I think it's tough. I I think that it generally I don't think it really helps to have companies take sides in the culture war. But other parts of the culture war where you're talking about like basic human rights. But I'm split on those things, right? So when the NBA like pulls out of North Carolina because of the transgender bathroom things, because they see it as a human right issue. But when I say they, right, it's like the NBA as an organization, and of course within it there's a diversity of opinions. Part of me wants to praise it because I think you're taking a human rights stand. Of course, when
Yeah.
and at the same time when they back off human rights claims when China pushes them, right?
Right.
I think they're
And
I think
it
they're doing
looks a
the wrong
little
thing, right?
right. It looks well if they push on one and don't push on the other, it makes them feel hypocritical.
Yeah, but of course, if they're thinking,
But there
uh,
are there are
right,
other things going on.
right. So if they're thinking, look at the harm that we're going to do, right? If we get out of China. Now, mind you, are they really thinking that, or are they just thinking about, oh, look, we're going to lose so much, we're not going to make so much money if we
Right.
leave China. So I think those things kind of matter. If you can't take sides on basic human rights, what is the idea of being a good corporate
Yeah.
corporate citizen? But to me, those are things like I personally would prefer if companies kind of did that but stayed away from other more controversial issues, like abortion,
Right.
like immigration. I, I, I don't know. To me, it just seems like you're getting into a point where you're a corporation that's representing the interests of a lot of people and a lot of diverse opinions, and it seems unfair to kind of to pick and choose. But I don't have a bright line for you here, right?
Yeah. And I think it has to be judged case by case, by person by person, right? Everybody has to make their own decisions about these things, and and how far they want to push other people to make the same decision as themselves.
Right. But what I want to point to, right, is that as we kind of make these decisions, individually, we can make the wrong decision, right?
Right. And that's what I think is useful about ethics is that it helps us make the right decision. Right. The more we understand ethics, and the more we can understand like why are we making these decisions? Let's think through the ethical possibilities of these issues. That helps us make the right decisions.
Andy, I think we should keep making this podcast then. All right. Let's do it. All right,
All
Andy.
right.
Good podcast, man. GP.
Contentious but good podcast.
All right. Play nice, everybody.